Hello and welcome to the Gamedev London podcast, a community of amazing people who love talking and sharing about their love of making games, the detail behind the making of games, whether you're based in London or not. I'm your host, I'm Oscar Clark, I'm a he, him pronoun, and I'm on a quest to understand everything you wanted to know about game dev, but never dared to ask. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Chris Filip, who's working at Creative England, was also instrumental behind GameAnglia. And we're going to have a lovely chat, hopefully, about the joys of prototyping. So I will, 2 seconds as I press the button, I will ask Chris to come on screen. Chris, tell us all about yourself and what you do, please.
Thanks a lot for having me, Oscar. It's really good. It's really good to be here. Well, where should I start? I guess I've moved around a lot between different parts of the games industry, starting in game design and then moving into production and to like starting GameAnglia, as you mentioned, and then moving into more of a support role because I realized that it's that's where we still need a lot of skill and a lot of action, making sure that these upcoming companies, this upcoming talent can be supported to get to the top of the games industry. So I'm really happy
One
to
thing I'm
be
going to
here
chuck at
today.
you while you're at it, because we've known each other for quite a while, and I think I'm right in saying you're a student when we first met. Is that right?
Yeah, that is right. So I studied computer games design at the University of Suffolk, all the way in Ipswich, and I think you kicked off one of our game jams in year two. And yeah, I think you were actually my first UK games industry connection, and that also highlights that I'm not originally from the UK. I'm from Romania, where I knew a little bit about Ubisoft and EA, who have studios there. But it turns out, that's mostly created as co-development, not a lot of original IP going on. It's just being part of these gigantic productions. Whereas in the UK, it's a lot more, work on your own IP, start your own little company, and you get so much support about it, especially around prototypes, which is what we'll talk
Yeah,
about.
I'm sorry you had to meet me first. I'm sure there are much more interesting people out there in the industry you could have met first. Anyway, but I think it's kind of interesting, sort of, because obviously I've seen you kind of getting more and more involved in the scene, and like you say, you come into this environment, you've seen the sort of processes that we're using in the UK, but you kind of tried to be a pivotal part. I mean, I remember the stuff that you were doing with the payload guys and the technical kind of community that you were doing there, and the stuff that you were doing. We did a Yuki tour talking about some issues that were going on with HMRC and various other things on this sort of tour about how to get money in game development. And you hosted one of those sessions there as well, as I recall.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
let's
exactly.
talk a little bit about prototyping. I know you've got some stuff that you're doing as Creative England in terms of supporting that process, but let's go to some basics. What do we mean by prototyping?
So there's a lot of ways to qualify a prototype, but the main way in which I've seen it, in which I've seen it described in a lot of games literature is finding the fun, and it's getting to that what minimum viable product is. So basically, creating a small piece that contains the core of your game, a small piece of software that contains the core of your game, that if somebody plays or interacts with, they get where the fun comes from in your game, without any fancy graphics, without any fancy 3D models or any like a lot of sound or anything like that, unless that's exactly where your fun would come from. So can I give some examples, or should I?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Okay,
More the better.
so there's this really cool game that's being developed by Robot Turtle,
Oh yeah.
which is that camera game that's basically, everybody hails it as the next Portal, right? And that only took a GIF in order to see where the fun in that was, and that was a prototype, right?
Yeah.
That was amazing, and it was clearly something that had been developed by somebody over, a relatively short period of time than it's going to take to create a whole game. Another example that I can give that was very, very up and coming when like about a year ago or 2 years ago, was somebody who was doing procedural animations. And you may have seen these um, gray boxes in Unity, I think it was, with spiders, like some mechanical spider legs moving around, and then the main protagonist was shooting them. Like that's what I call tech prototypes. Things that are quite easy to create and describe. There is a lot of work behind them, but it's literally one concept. That's where the fun comes from, and that's what you put on Twitter, and you get billions and millions of retweets. Then you take that to a publisher and they just throw some money at you.
No, certainly. And I think there's lots of other examples. What I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly just show on screen for those of us, those of you who are watching us on YouTube. But don't worry, if you're listening as the podcast will explain. So we did a quick survey. We got 37 responses, and we asked the question, how important is creating a prototype to you? Now, I'm not surprised because my followers, I think your followers basically, are all game devs, and a lot of them are game designers. And basically everybody said yes, hugely important. In fact, 66% said it was 5 out of 10. Sorry, 5 out of 5 important. So the most important it could be, critical essentially. Additionally, I saw that there was a third, the remaining users said 4 out of 5. So obviously, for the games folks, we think this is an important thing. I think there are some caveats on whether that's true or not. I think there are circumstances where a prototype is absolutely essential. There are other ways of looking at it, I suspect. But I have to admit, I'm in the 5 out of 5 section. Where would you find yourself in this kind of like prioritization, Chris?
It's definitely 5 out of 5. When it comes to your game per se, right? And it does come with some caveats. You should have a business plan. You should have an audience that actually plays that prototype and gives you feedback, and then you iterate on that. But yeah, it's definitely as part of the top 3.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But let's talk a little bit about a little bit further on the survey. So we then asked, what is the principal purpose? So you mentioned one of them already, find the fun. Unsurprisingly, finding the fun was 1/3 of all the responses. So that makes a lot of sense. That was the largest group. But I added a few others. So confirming if there's an audience for the concept. I think that's a really important one. Now, there are some people who might not consider that to be a prototype. They might consider that to be a sort of marketing test. But I still think it's part of the prototyping process, personally. We also looked at exploring the idea before committing to the design. Now, that's another thing I like particularly. I think it's different than finding the fun because it's really a step before finding the fun, or almost. Does that make sense to you?
It does, and that fits in with the other bit, with one of the other answers, which is to understand the technical implications and to see if the design can be realized as a playable. Because you may have a really cool idea, but then you realize that you need to do, frame by frame animations, as an example, right? Or that the Unity physics doesn't work for what you want, or that doing it in blueprints as opposed to doing it in C# isn't going to work as easily as you thought it would. So it's all about that testing. And I think a really good example, coming to think of it, of what exactly is a prototype that combines these is, I can give an anecdote. As I was walking during the pandemic, there were a lot of houses that started renovating next to where we were living. And there was this one house that I was walking past almost every other week that had a front door, and on the front door you saw maybe 3 or 4 paint tests. And I'm that's and then in the end they finally decided on one, and they painted the whole door that color. And that's how I see a prototype. Like it's you trying out a few different things to see what works, and then choosing the best one.
And I think this is one of the reasons why I like the finding if there's an audience for a concept, because I think we can save a lot of time. And I very much an advocate of essentially building the smallest thing possible, even if that's just a trailer, even if it's physically kind of like putting board game pieces together on a piece of paper with sort of scrappy maps or arrows on it, and just talking someone through what's going to happen in the process. All these kind of scrappy techniques I think are really powerful, because we can basically get rid of the stuff that's not going to work very, very quickly. And I'd much rather spend time faffing about with plasticine and post-it notes than to have a coder build something that in the end won't be any good. And in fact, I'd rather that coder or even get an artist to use asset store stuff just to produce a 30-second trailer explaining what we think the gameplay could be. To see if anyone cares.
Exactly. And it saves so much in terms of costs, right? Because when you're looking at the entirety of a game development production schedule, a lot of polish, it's basically the 80-20 rule, right? The 80% of the game is going to be done in 20% of the time, 20% of the game is going to be done in the remaining 80% of the time. And what you don't want to do is move even more of that last 20% into the initial 80%, because then you're just testing out things unnecessarily. So if your game, just imagine how much it would take for you to try and create shaders from scratch for your game, when your game actually, when those shaders aren't critical for the game, they're just kind of like a wish list for one of your artists or for your main artist.